Amriteshwaryai Namaha. Om Amriteshwaryai Namaha. Om Amriteshwaryai Namaha. Om Parthaya Pratibodhitam Bhagavata Narayanena Swayam Vyasena Graditam Puranamunina Madhye Mahabharatam Advaidamritavarshinim Bhagavatim Ashtadashaധ്യായിനീം Ambatvamanusandathami Bhagavad Gita Bhavadveshini. Namostu te vyasa vishala buddhe Pullaravinda yatapatra netra Yena tvaya bharata taila purna Prajvalito jnanamaya pradipa Prapanna parijataya Totra retraikapane Jnana smudraya krishnaya Gitamrita duhe namaha. Sarvopanishado gavo Dogda gopala nandanaha. Partha vatsya sudhir bhokta Dugdam gitamritam mahata. Vasudeva sutam devam Kamsachanuramardanam Devaki Paramanandam Krishnam Vande Jagadguru. Om Namah Shivaya. It's nice to be back. See everybody again. So we have finished 3 chapters of the Bhagavad Gita. Now we're beginning chapter 4. And we always have to remember at intervals like this, it's good to remind ourselves that we should not think, oh, I'm going through the Gita. We're going through each verse, each chapter of the Gita. Amma says it should be the other way around. The Gitas should be going through us. So we don't think like we're rushing through the Gita. You don't want the Gita to rush through you. You want it to go through you and stay in you and percolate deep inside. So for that, we should allow the Gita to go through us. And so today, being the first day we talk about chapter 4, I'm going to give you an overview primarily, and we will into the 4th chapter also. But more than anything, I think it's important that we get that overview first before we go into it, because puts it in context. Each verse that we read, we should understand it's part of an overall flow. So, as with previous chapters, I will tell you the different sections and what those sections are dedicated to. So in chapter 4, there are three main portions. There's 42 verses. And the first portion is, we could call Ishvara Avatara, which is verses 1 through 15. And the second section is the main part of this chapter, which is called what? Anybody looked at what the title of chapter 4 was? Jnana Karma Sannyasa. Jnana Karma Sannyasa Yoga. So we're going to learn what is Jnana Karma Sannyasa. We kind of know what Jnana is, or in Hindi they might say Jnana. So what is Jnana? Jnana. Knowledge. What is Karma? Action. What is Sannyasa? What is knowledge, action, renunciation? We have to understand what that means. It's Jnanena Karma Sannyasa, which means, the renunciation of action through knowledge. He's going to explain what that is. We'll go into that today also a little more. That's verse 16 to 24. Actually, it's the smallest section, even though it's the main part. But ultimately, we find with these kind of scriptural texts, the teaching is relatively simple, but it's, our minds are complicated, so that simple teaching is difficult for us to really assimilate, because our minds have been made unnecessarily complicated. So it is 9 verses. And then the third section is about the means of gaining self-knowledge and the benefits of gaining self-knowledge. That's verses 25 to 42. So now we'll go into each of these sections a little bit more in depth. So, what was section 1? In the old days, I didn't also study in the old days. I studied in Kali Yuga, like you. So we were allowed to take notes, but in the old days, Amma says that nobody was allowed to take notes. Just had to remember everything. Yeah. And then when we were in South Dakota the other day, they said that, they have these song keepers, that preserve the singing, the songs. And they said that if you don't memorize the song the first time you hear it, you're not a qualified song keeper. And there's no taking notes either, so this is how these traditions used to be. So we have to try to, just think of it that way. We try to, when Amma says something, and then afterwards we don't want to be like, what did Amma just say? So we have to slowly train ourselves like that. So he says in the section on Ishvara Avatara. Ishvara Avatara means the divine incarnations of God. So when Krishna talks about that, he's going to show the difference between a divine incarnation or an avatar and a normal human being. So we can imagine, well, there's quite a few differences. There must be a lot of differences. Or we might say they're totally different. But if someone would say, okay, tell me how they're different. What is different about them? In what ways are they different? And how is your experience of life different from an avatar's experience of life? We might be kind of at a loss for words. Well, actually, I don't know exactly. Just know it's got to be different because they're an avatar, they're an incarnation, and I'm not. So he's going to explain to us a little more detail about that. They look the same because you go into the hall, I'll just say that, to my understanding, Amma never had a guru. There's no evidence that at one point in life Amma suddenly got realization. All indications are that she was born this way and she remains that way till now. So I'm going to talk about Amma in that context, that she has whatever wisdom and realization she has now. My perception is that she's always had it. So if you go into the hall, she's just sitting there hugging people. We hug people also, She sits there, she moves her body around, she smiles, she talks with us, so she just looks like a normal person. So, but there are 3 key differences in the case of someone who is born with that awareness. And that is the cause of their birth, the cause of their existence, the nature of their existence, and the purpose of their existence in this world. So let's look at it this way. What is the cause of our taking birth in this world? If we want to compare the difference between an avatar and us, first we have to understand, we have to reflect on these: cause, nature, purpose, right? Well, what is the cause of our taking birth here? Now, yes?
Union.
That might be the purpose, right?
Karma.
Oh, okay.
Karma.
Karma.
No, okay.
Typically we would say that it is, if we didn't have karma, we wouldn't be taking birth, right? Unless we were an avatar, but we're not. So unless somebody's hiding in this room that I don't know about. So, you, Breton? Okay, maybe. And the goal for us, of course, would be union or liberation. But if the cause is on the surface due to karma, what does that tell us about ourselves? Because karma comes from something else, right? It's not like everybody has the same karma, and just because that's on the surface. The karmic bondage that we all experience is on the surface. If we go deeper, what? Desire. And where does desire come from? Remember, we went through this whole progression, right? Where does the desire come from? The feeling of vasana. Okay, the vasanas, yeah. And where do the vasanas come from? From repeated actions. What propels us into repeated actions? We're pursuing something, right? We feel unsatisfied, huh? Yeah, and then keep going. Why do I have all these likes and dislikes? Because, yes? Right, and you just jumped a step though, because what happens is, from being ignorant of who you are and having likes and dislikes, the midpoint is that there's this nagging sense of incompleteness all the time. Because you don't know who your true self, so you always feel like something's missing. Because if you're the king and you don't know you're the king, you're going to feel like, oh my gosh, something's missing from my life. So you feel incomplete, you feel limited. Everybody feels that way all day long. You know, if someone says, would you like something to eat? You wouldn't say, no, I'm the whole universe, actually. I'm pervading all the trees and the plants and the vegetables. I don't need to eat anything. I am that life force that pervades the universe. You know, if we said that, it would just be words, you know, and actually we'd be like, oh, I'm so hungry. You know? So we do feel hunger, we identify with all these things. So ultimately it's that ignorance of who we truly are. And that leads to what we said after that, like the feeling of incompleteness, and then we do all these actions out of that desire for satisfying ourselves, and then we create karma, like Jebron said. And so we're born by force, we're born helplessly, that's the key thing. Now I know this may be at odds, what I'm saying may be at odds with some of the books that are out there and everything, like that say that you choose your birth and everything. They may be saying that in a different sense, but sometimes it's kind of hard to tell the semantic, if there's a semantic conflict there, or if it's really a conflict in theory. But basically, Amma also says that we are born helplessly by our karma, because we create all this karma and desires, and then that pushes us into another birth. So for us, you could say that we are falling to this earth helplessly. And in fact, if you've read the old version of The Mother of Immortal Bliss, it was an old book that came out, it's not in print anymore, I don't think. Amma talks about how people come into birth helplessly by the fruits of their past actions. And you might have read in Shantamritananda Swami's book how that teaching came from some pages of Amma's diary that he had in his hand. Anybody read that book? You know, Amma was writing all the secrets to the universe, and he didn't know that he was just so curious. And when she took it out of his hand, you know, he held a few pages, and this was that section of the book of Amma's diary. And then she tore up the rest and threw it in the backwaters. He was reading it, it's like all the secrets of the universe are written there. He was just completely immersed in it. And then Amma had told him, don't read it, you know, and he couldn't control his excitement. So he went in there and he took it and started reading it. And then she caught him, you know, and then she said, oh, okay, bad boy. Took it out of his hand, and he had those pages. So those pages explain how we are born helplessly by the force of our karma. So for us, we are falling to earth, basically, you could say. But for the avatar, like Krishna, and this is the point here, Krishna's talking about himself. So for an avatara, it is not helplessly. It is free will. It is a choice, and it doesn't come from ignorance. It comes from omniscience and compassion. So in Awakened Children 5, chapter 5, there's a beautiful dialogue that takes place. There's beautiful dialogues in all these books, but I want to share this beautiful dialogue. One of the brahmacharis asks Amma, you said that you were in a totally absorbed state for some time. What made you come down from that supreme state? And Amma replied, compassion. Somehow a thought arose. No, not somehow, it was simply there. The idea to be compassionate was always there. That was the sankalpa, or the resolve. Holding on to that thought of compassion, Amma could return to this world. Compassion is what keeps this body here in the world. If that sankalpa or resolve of compassion were not there, the Mahatma or the realized being would not return to the world but would remain in that state of absorption. So this really corroborates, what Krishna is going to talk about. In the case of somebody who has that realization, or an avatara, it is not a fall, but it's a descending. That's what that word means. Avatarati in Sanskrit means to descend. Avatarati. So avatara is one who descends willingly. So just think of it as this kind of analogy. You fall into a well. So you didn't know the well was there. It was a mistake. It happened. You're helplessly falling. But another person sees you falling, having fallen into that well. They willingly jump into the well to help you come out of compassion. So this is what an avatara does. They willingly plunge into this world full of sorrow and misery and suffering out of compassion and omniscience of what they're getting themselves into to help suffering people like us. So this explains why these avatars' lives typically are full of difficulty and suffering, because that's where they go. They don't choose to come because everything's great. If there's a problem, if people need help, if people are worthy of supreme compassion, that's where they go. So Krishna's life was full of challenges, Jesus' life was full of challenges, Buddha's life was full of challenges. You don't hear about that one as much, but if you read the stories, they were scorned and people threw rocks at them, and they went through a lot of suffering. So typically that's what you see. They knew what was coming and they accepted it. They were ready to withstand all those challenges. So the avatara's descent is a combination of omniscience and compassion. So this is the cause of their taking birth. Now the nature of a avatara and the difference between an incarnation and a normal person like us is, first of all, like we said, normal human beings are bound by their ignorance. That's not only the essential cause, but that's the nature of their life all the time. We live immersed in our ignorance all day long. Ignorance means we don't know who we are, like one of our people said. So the other way around, if you look at the avatara, like someone like Krishna, or you can choose the incarnation of your preference. They are completely free. They have no bondage because they know who they are. They have that self-realization. So just to look back at Rama and Krishna, they went through a lot of hardship if you read the stories, but they accepted it and they were able to transcend it. Krishna was even smiling. There are stories about how he was smiling even when he faced very difficult circumstances. And then we see in Amma the same thing. She had to go through so much suffering when she was a little girl, and she never complained. If you haven't read her biography, I wholeheartedly recommend it. She never complained about all the suffering she had to go through. And the thing is that freedom that self-knowledge gives you enables you to do the right thing without being constrained by your own feeling of neediness. So I'll give you an example. It was during darshan one year in Washington, D.C. And sometimes, I'll be standing next to Amma at the end of darshan. And it had been a long program, as it typically is. So when it's getting towards the end, everyone's like, okay, let's go home and go to sleep, because it's like 4 in the morning or 3 in the morning and you're really tired. And maybe you haven't eaten, you may be really hungry. So we'll be like, just hope this program is over soon. And then towards the end of darshan, one Indian family comes up and somebody had just finished singing, And the cultural programs usually end when it gets close to darshan, right? They just play some soft music. And one mother came up and she said, my daughter didn't get a chance to dance yet. And she says, I want to have my daughter dance. And literally I could see the end of the line right in front of me. And I was just like, no way, please, no dance, no. Because, and I didn't even want Amma to even know. I was like trying to stand in front of her, so I'm like, because I was so tired. I mean, it's just, I admit it. So she was impassionately saying, my daughter, I was like, how long is the song? Which song is it? And it was this infinitely long song that they had choreographed to the dance to. It's like 10 minutes. I was like, oh, no way. And then also, Amma's done. What's Amma going to do when the dance is going on? She has nothing to do. She's finished darshan, right? So then Amma heard me and this woman talking, and then she looked over and she says, what is she asking? And I was like, please don't ask that question. And she just said, her daughter wants to dance or something. Like, I told her darshan's over, so, I was like, no, let her dance. And I was like, really? And then she said, yeah, let her dance. And then she called Bhagavad and she's like, find all the people that haven't had darshan and give them tokens, She's going to prolong the darshan. So it was like Jilam Jilam, some song that's 10 plus minutes long. So the girl goes up on the stage and she dances, and then Amma just extends the darshan another 15 minutes or so. And of course, it was like a seminal event in this young girl's life. So obviously Amma knew it was important. But the thing that makes her free to choose that, rather than be like I was, which was like, I want to go to bed, is that self-knowledge. She's completely full. She doesn't need, any of these things that we feel we need. So she could do the right thing at that moment. So that's the nature of a being who's born with that realization. So the purpose of an avatar's birth is also fundamentally different from ours. So the purpose of our birth is twofold, as our special guests for going to do the workshop tomorrow both said in tandem. We're here to purge our karma and realize the purpose of our birth, which is to realize ourselves. So we're born because of our karma, but we're also born to exhaust that karma. And when the karma is all exhausted and we have knowledge of ourselves, then that's the end. We reach self-realization, and then there's no more rebirth for us. So, unfortunately, or I guess you could say for better or for worse, the only way to exhaust the karma is by taking birth in a body, and through this body. In fact, it is said that even if we go to heaven and we live there and enjoy lots of things, we're not exhausting any karma there. So if you're here when you go to heaven, then when your good karma is over and you come back to the planet, you're still here. You haven't gone anywhere spiritually, you just got to exhaust. It's like you earned money, you went to a hotel, you went on vacation, you had fun, and now your money's gone, you're back to where you were. Starting, slaving away and earning money again. So, the only place you can do it is on earth, in the human body. This is how they talk about it in the Indian context. So, even an animal's body is essentially for the purpose of burning karma. And the nice thing about animals is that they can't go backwards. We can go backwards, but they can only go forwards. Why is that? Anybody have any idea? Shane?
Because they don't really make conscious choices in the sense that we do, so they don't, they just follow their program.
Instinct, right. Shane's always got the right answers. So, it's so true. So, the problem with us is that we have free will, which means that we can use it properly and we can also misuse it. So if you have discernment and if you have free will, only then is it possible to do the wrong thing and create bad karma. Animals, and including us in previous lives, when we were animals, we were all progressing kind of automatically because we were burning off karma and we weren't creating any new karma. But once you become a human being, it's possible to create more and more and more karma. In fact, Amma, when people are expressing their anger at each other, Amma says, my children, please, 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 I'm not telling you to love each other, and I'm not telling you that, to do something impossible. Just one thing, don't create more karma this time around. And whatever you do, just try to reduce your karma. Don't make it worse. So that itself is a very powerful statement, which encourages us to, if she were to say, you have to love that person that you hate, how do you go from love to hate in 1 second? You can't do it. But if you realize that your hate is creating more bad karma for yourself, then you can say, wait a second, I don't want bad karma, so let me figure out how to deal with this hate that I have inside. So this is our case, right? In the case of animals. But in the case of a realized being, they don't have to purge any. They don't have any karma to purge, because they don't have any ignorance, they don't have any ego, they don't have any desires for themselves, so they don't have any karma that they've accumulated. So what is their purpose after all? He is going to explain that very clearly later on in this chapter in verses 7 and 8. It's quite famous. I'll read the Sanskrit because some of you may have heard it. Yada yada hi dharmasya glanyar bhavati bharata abhyuttanam adharmasya tadatmanam srijamyaham paritranaya sadhunam vinashaya cha dushkritam dharma samsthapanarthaya sambhavami yuge yuge. So in English it means, whenever dharma is in decay and adharma flourishes, O Bharata, I create myself. To protect the righteous and destroy the wicked, to establish dharma firmly, I take birth age after age. So it's a very powerful statement. Now imagine you've been playing with Krishna, like Arjuna, for however many years, maybe 20, 30 years, and suddenly one of your best friends says, actually, I created myself. And I have taken birth, eon after eon after eon. I mean, it just would have blown your mind. This is what Arjuna was going through. That's why he has sometimes seemingly foolish questions, because you have to remember that he was good friends with Krishna for a long time. So it's kind of hard to sort of wrap your head around what he's saying. So the maintenance of dharma is the purpose of an avatar's coming. Dharma can mean many things, but righteousness, it can also mean that dharma is the inherent nature or function of a thing. So the inherent function or purpose of a human being, like we said, is to realize who you truly are, God realization, self-realization. So he's there to establish that, he's there to help people realize their true self, which is why he gave the Gita teaching. So Amma says that God has given us the scriptures, and there are realized beings to show us the right way of living. But when people fail to follow those two, then God has to come to show us and to establish Dharma more firmly. So if you look at Kali Yuga today, if you look at this age of materialism, most people stop watching the news and reading the news because it's too depressing. But if you happen to see it, like when I was going through the airports on my travels, you see it all in the news. It's like it's becoming worse and worse every day, sometimes, all the things that are going on. But from my perspective, Amma has said that this age needs the qualities of universal motherhood more than anything else. And then the news always teaches you that, or anything you hear about society always teaches you that. So she doesn't talk about herself, but we can understand that she is an embodiment of universal motherhood. So she is delivering what the world needs most today. So that can be the purpose of her birth. So there's two different ways that these incarnations can do this. They can remove adharma, or unrighteousness, or bad things, or they can create dharma, right? Restore dharma. So in the old days, like when Parashurama was there, and Rama and Krishna, the way they used to remove evil was they would just kill all these bad people. Because there were only a few really bad demons here and there, and Krishna would just go and, even as a kid and a baby, he would kill them, is what it says in the stories. You know, it sounds a little graphic, but maybe it's also symbolic. The problem is, one of the Swamis jokingly remarked that there's so many evil people today that they'd have to kill everybody practically, which they can't do. So what Amma does today is she, quote-unquote, kills or destroys the evil qualities in people and makes them good people. So it's not a question of actually killing people, it's that those negativities in us she extinguishes by smothering it with love and compassion, universal love and infinite compassion. So an example would be, if you compared it with like something that a doctor can do, if seems that there's no hope to cure one part of the body, they may remove it. Like appendectomy, or if there's a organ that has become cancerous, maybe they can remove that organ completely. The other side would be to educate people about health. So you increase awareness about health so you don't have to do something like that. So they can remove bad things, and they can also teach good, and teach Dharma, and teach spirituality. So most of these avatars over the past thousands of years have done both. So they would teach through their lives typically, and they would remove bad people when they had to, and they would teach through their way of existence. So Rama, as an example, taught through his life. You don't really hear about Rama's teachings. Has anybody ever read Rama's teachings? You don't hear about the Rama Gita or something like that. There is a Rama Gita, but his teachings were very small compared with what Krishna left us. But Rama taught through his life. Krishna taught, he gave us the Gita. He taught us the essence of all of the scriptures in just 700 verses. But his life was a little confusing sometimes, right? He would steal butter from the gopis. He had 16,108 wives. And, I don't know if we would want to imitate that. Amma has said that if you want to try to imitate Krishna, go ahead, but you have to imitate everything. Not just the, having lots of wives part. You have to imitate everything, which means you have to, for example, bring people back to life, bring dead people back to life, which he did on numerous occasions. Try that one. You have to fight and defeat very ominous, formidable demonic foes. You have to keep 16,108 wives contented all the time, which he did successfully. You have to change a person's next birth. Ekalavya, he changed his birth. His reincarnation, he says, next life you're going to be this, and he was. So try that one for size. You have to teach the Gita, right? And how about making sure that you're remembered for 5,000 years, like he is? Is anybody going to remember us 5,000 years from now? Most likely not. So we cannot imitate partially. Krishna's teaching was the Gita, and his life is actually something that we relish, but it's not something to be imitated. So in this way, the cause, nature, and the goal are all different. So Krishna says in verse 9, whoever correctly knows me thus is not reborn, but he becomes one with me. So we're still here in this first section part, right? So becoming one with Krishna sounds great. We'd like to merge in Krishna or Buddha or Rama or Amma. But the trick is understanding me correctly, he says. So in the 7th chapter, he's going to talk about what that means. He talks about the lower nature of God and the higher nature of God. Typically, if we're interested in Amma, we focus more on the lower nature of Amma, not on her higher nature. Now, when we say lower nature of Amma, what do you think that might be? Amma has a lower nature? How can she have a lower nature?
Asking her for material.
Mm-hmm. And when you ask Amma for material things, you're considering Amma to be the body, because you're talking to her body, right? Okay? What are other aspects of Amma's lower nature that we become focused on, fixated on? We're worried about her health. That's good, that's out of love. But that means sometimes we mistake Amma for the body again, right? Other things, like for example, people like to become experts in all the details. Amma's going to enter the hall. I know Amma. I know how she enters like this. And this is how Amma gives darshan. This is how Amma likes the table. And this is how Amma likes the car. This is how Amma likes her food. This is how Amma likes her room. I'm an expert in Amma. If I know all these things, aren't I an expert in Amma? I know everything about Amma. I can tell you what she likes to eat, etc. But Krishna is going to talk about this in the 7th chapter. He's going to say all of this stuff is the apara prakriti, which means the lower nature of God. You have to know the formless absolute nature. That's of course not easy, but even if we just keep it in our mind that all these things that I'm learning about Amma are not the real, unchanging, absolute, eternal Amma. It's just this temporary form and name that she's taken right now. And I'm fortunate to be able to interact with that, but I should never confuse myself to think that that is the ultimate Amma. So the real Amma is the one who delivers. The real Amma is the one who uses the body, but she's not bound by it, and even when the body falls apart, it doesn't affect her. That's what I was going to say. So I want to read you a quote from the Gospel of Thomas, which is, remember what we talked about on Christmas? What was the Gospel of Thomas from? Because we never heard about that Gospel in the Bible. Where was it from? Anybody remember? The Nag Hammadi Library, or the Gnostic Gospels. There's a Gospel called the Gospel of Thomas. And there's a very similar quote to what I said, verse 9 from this chapter. Jesus says, "Whoever discovers the interpretation of these sayings will not taste death. Whoever drinks from my mouth will become like me. I myself shall become that person, and the hidden things will be revealed to him." So imagine reading the Bible and having Jesus say that you will become me and I will become you. It doesn't say it quite like that in the original Bible. So the hidden things that he's talking about is the para prakriti, or the supreme state of God, not the lower state. So this first section on Ishvara Avatara is very unique because it doesn't come anywhere else in the Gita. It's just these 15 verses, and particularly the first 8 verses. So the second portion of chapter 4, from 16 to 24, is the main portion. Like I said, this is the main teaching of Jnana Karma Sannyasa. So how do you renounce all actions through knowledge? Think about it. How does one renounce actions through knowledge?
Knowledge that you're not the doer.
Realize that you're not the doer. And what do you need to do? What do you need to do? What do you need to understand to realize that you're not the doer?
So that she is.
That, yeah, Amma is, or God is, right? But then what does that say about you? You're understanding that if everything is being done, yes, Jane?
You're not the body,
You're not the body. If you're not the body, what are you?
the self.
You're the self. So it's an understanding that God is doing everything. I'm not the body. I am the self. I'm God. Basically, it's a kind of a circular argument, but it boils down to understanding what God is and also understanding yourself better. So deeper self-understanding leads to renunciation of action, because there is no action. Remember we talked about in chapter 3? He said that, the gunas, or these qualities in the world, are just interacting with the gunas in our mind, in our intellect, in our body. These qualities, sattva, rajas, and tamas, in the world are interacting with those qualities in us. So you're not doing anything. You're that consciousness that's watching it happen, but your mind is interacting. Mind's not you. The mind has those qualities. So therefore, when you understand yourself, that you're not the body, you're not the mind, you're not the intellect, understand you're the eternal Atman, then you realize that you're not doing anything. So there's no action even taking place. That's how you renounce action. So in this chapter, in this central portion of the chapter, he actually talks about renunciation from 2 different angles. what's the traditional understanding of renunciation? Typically, when we say renunciation, what do we think? If you're a renunciate, you're what?
Giving up worldly life.
Giving up worldly life, and then what do you do?
Focus on God.
Where?
In a
How do you do that? If you
monastery
give up worldly life, where are you going to focus on God? You got to do it somewhere. Huh?
in an ashram. Or
In an ashram, in a cave, in the Himalayas, grow beard, you know, wear some flowing robes, long hair, like that, become old in a cave, you know. So this was what I was looking for the first time I went to India. I got to Amma's ashram, and I spent, you know, a couple weeks there, and I just was restless, you know. I mean, I was 22, I guess. So I was restless, I couldn't sit still. And I kept thinking that I was supposed to go somewhere else. And I kept thinking there was going to be some wise old guru somewhere waiting for me to come and just be like, when I got there, he'd say, my disciple, you finally come. I'm waiting for you to come. And here I had just been with Amma, how dumb can you be? You know, and it's just so silly. But the thing is, we have our preconceptions, right? This is the image, you know, that there's this renunciation where you leave the world and you go off and you're just going to, you know, be a yogi or a Swami. So, withdrawal from society is one way. We won't say that it doesn't exist, but it's one way to renounce actions. You become a monk, you live in an ashram. And your only duty is to do sadhana and austerity. Is this what we see around Amma? No. Even Swamis have cell phones around Amma. It's on airplane mode, don't worry. Even Swamis have to run ashrams in Chicago. Amma, she has a phone. She makes phone calls all the time. Even during darshan, sometimes we call so-and-so. I heard that they're having a problem. We have to check and make sure they're okay. You know, so she's always interacting with the world. Even Amma is not renouncing the world. So there must be something else other than just living in a cave and renouncing the world. The other type of sannyasa is internal sannyasa, inner renunciation. And that has nothing to do with what we do externally. Sometimes you see Amma in darshan, people bring her a cake, you know, and everyone's trying to keep the cake away from her, you know. They don't want her to eat too much sugar. So then Amma, when nobody's looking, she'll grab a piece and start eating. You know, and what does that mean? Does she have desires? What's going on? I thought Amma was beyond desire. You know, it's just, if you look at the external actions, you get confused. She doesn't do it for her own sake. In fact, she can go for days and days without eating anything, and she sometimes does. But when you identify with the true self, you have total attachment within, and you're in the world, like they say, you could be in the world, but not of it. The example that Amma gives, she says that it's okay for your boat to be in the water, but it's a problem if the water gets inside your boat, right? Because then the boat can sink. So if you want to survive in the world, being in the world is okay. You can be in the world, can float like a lotus leaf or butter in the milk, you know, floating, but if the water of the world gets inside of your mind and weighs it down, you can sink and drown in the world too. So we can just assume that anyhow the world is full of ups and downs and suffering. If there's joy, there's definitely going to be sorrow. So if you assume that the world is going to fry us one way or the other, one commentator said, if the world's going to fry you one way or the other, the only choice you have is what type of pan do you want to be? Do you want to be a cast iron pan or do you want to be a Teflon no-stick pan? It's better to be the no-stick pan, so don't let all these things, suffering of the world, stick to you. So how does one reach that state? That's a very important question, right? And like we said, the only way is to change your understanding of yourself. So so long as we're in the body, we can't avoid interacting with the world. Even if you try to go escape the world and live in the Himalayas, typically your vasanas will drag you back into the world. We see it over and over again with people who are not ready. So the only solution is to discover a higher definition of yourself, to understand yourself from a different standpoint. Amma says, become established within yourself. That's the word she uses. And when you get established within yourself, that gives you supreme detachment because the real self is infinite. That's what she's trying to guide us to. And this helps us understand Amma much better too. Has anybody ever seen Amma cry during darshan? Yeah? It's like, wow, I thought she was beyond devotion. Why is she beyond emotions? Why is she crying during darshan? Think about it. You might get confused. Be careful. Because if you're identified with the Supreme Self, doesn't mean you can't show emotion. It means you can do whatever you want. If someone's coming and they're sad and you want to relieve their burden, you can share in their sorrow. You can take that on yourself. Imagine a person just lost a loved one. If Amma cries with that person for a few minutes, maybe a lifetime of grieving will be over in just, a few days. I've seen that happen actually. I've seen people who've gone through that purge and they were over it, instead of dragging it with them into the next lifetime even, right? So she can do that out of compassion. And the next moment it's gone. That we can't do typically. If you're crying, you're typically crying and it lingers with you for a long time. So the point is that she never forgets who she really is. We forget ourselves in all these joys and sorrows. Like if we have some delicious dish, we forget ourselves. We forget we're the Atman. Then, when sorrow comes, we also forget that we're the Atman. So forgetfulness is our main problem. But the internal detachment is what Krishna is referring to when he says jnana karma sannyasa. Renunciation of action, the notion that there is action through understanding of who you truly are. So basically you're doing all the same actions that you were doing before, but it totally doesn't affect you anymore. Amma has said it's like selling a house but continuing to live inside the house. She told a story. She said, there was this father and son, who were trying to sell their house, and the family was trying to sell it. So one day the father came home and he saw that the house was on fire. And he said, "Oh no!" He called his son. He said, "Oh son, now we're never going to be able to sell the house because it's burning down." And the son says, No, don't worry, Dad. We already sold it. We did the deal this morning. So it's already sold." So the father was like so happy. Great, it doesn't belong to me anymore. And then the next moment, the real estate agent calls and he says, "No, sorry, actually that deal didn't go through." So again, he's crying. So if you're identified with it, it's constantly up and down, up and down. But if you're living in the house and not feeling that it belongs to you in the first place, nothing affects you. This is Amma's case. She has said she has made herself an offering a long time ago. Therefore, she has no claims to make. That's one reporter came to her and said, "Are you God realized?" That was her response. "I offered myself to the world a long time ago. I have no claims." When you become an offering, you have no claims to make about yourself after that. So this shows that basically she sold the house, so to speak. And in Sadhana Panchakam, Shankaracharya says, leave the house. That's his advice, his early advice in that. I think it's one of the first things he says. How do you leave the house? How can I do that? This is what he's talking about. You sell the house, you get rid of that identification with the body, the ego, the mind. Then it doesn't affect you anymore. So Amma sold the house. She never actually thought she owned the house to begin with. And so she's just a trustee of that property, of this body. So the deeper our understanding becomes, the easier it is for us to be objective, and it helps us from reacting to all these situations. So anytime we react angrily or with a lot of emotion, that reveals to us one more attachment we have to some circumstance in life. So the impact of the situation will stop affecting us as much when we let go and we understand ourselves better. So Krishna is going to teach in this section, the middle section, that once you know who you truly are, you can be involved in all kinds of activities and it feels like you're not doing anything at all. Can you imagine that? That's Amma's state. She's sitting there hugging thousands and thousands of people. It's a fever pitch while she's up there. If you stand there, we can't keep up with her for very long at all. But she's just the witness of all of it. The body's doing all that, she just watches it. In fact, she says when she's giving darshan, she doesn't feel tired. She says it's only when she stops that she's thinks about that. Because she says when she's giving darshan, she's giving. And she's immersed. I mean, it's kind of fake way to put it because we know there's no duality for her anytime, but she puts it in this way because it's easier for us to understand. When she's immersed in that love of oneness, there's no tiredness, right? So once you know that you are the all-pervasive, there will be no sense of doership and no tiredness. So in verse 24, it's a very important verse in the Gita. It goes, Brahmarpanam Brahmahavir, right? We all know that. Very important verse. Why? Because after we chant it, we get to eat, right? No. That's not why it's an important verse. It's a very important verse because it is about householder renunciation. And when we get there, you'll understand what we mean by that. It means, it shows the view that a householder or a person living in society needs to have in order to achieve renunciation while doing all their activities. And he's proving in that verse that liberation does not depend on your lifestyle, it depends on your understanding or your wisdom. So that is the culmination of the second section of chapter 4. And the third section is from verses 25 to 42, which, like we said a moment ago, it's about the preparation for knowledge and also the benefit of that self-knowledge. So what are the preparations required to attain knowledge? Remember, we talked about this here before. What is one of the most important preparations that we need to do in order to truly assimilate the teachings, Krishna's teachings, Amma's teachings? Self-purification. What did you say? Same thing? Yeah, self-purification, exactly. I keep saying it over and over again because I know from experience that you always have to remind yourself when you're out there digging a hole or planting a tree, that's fun. How about something that's not fun? You're slaving away, you're washing dishes for the 7th night in a row or something like that, and it's just getting on your nerves. You have to remind yourself that without purification, there's no hope for God realization. So he talks about 12 different types of yajna in this section. What is yajna? Anybody remember? Sacrifice. And we put it in a different context earlier when I talked about it in chapter 3. We didn't say sacrifice because sacrifice in English does carry with it some bit of begrudging connotations, like, oh, I gotta sacrifice again. Why am I always the one who has to sacrifice? Offering. Offering is a better way to put it in English, at least. Yajna. You don't say like, I'm gonna sacrifice this twig into the fire. Oh, drat, I don't want to do that, And I'm gonna sacrifice this banana for God. I don't want to give it to Amma, but I gotta sacrifice it. It's an offering, it's done with joy, with love, right? But that word sacrifice actually has that connotation. Sacrificium is the Latin origin, which means to make something sacred. So the original etymological derivation, is something very sacred. But today, sacrifice, typically means it's kind of something we do begrudgingly. Not for everybody, but on the whole, it's like that. But this 12 different types of offering. And this is one of my favorite sections because it helps us to see this world in a different way and to see our own lives in a different way. In fact, when the first time I went to Australia at the invitation, Amma told me to go, and at the invitation of the devotees there, We did a weekend retreat just on yajna. The culmination was a homa, was a fire ceremony, but I went through these 12 types of yajna, and we just spent a weekend, immersing ourselves in it. I'll just give you a quick overview of the names of them, and we'll find out later what they are. So daily worship is one kind of yajna. Enjoyment of objects is a kind of offering. Wow, what is that? I want to know about that, right? But then unfortunately, the third one is sensory restraint. That's a kind of offering also. Mental restraint or mental regulation is an offering. Charity is an offering. Austerity is an offering. Yoga is an offering. Self-study, chanting, studying, pranayama, or regulation of the life force, dietary discipline. All of these things are a kind of offering, he says, and we're going to understand what that means later. Then, in this third section, he also talks about the importance of a guru, the importance of having faith and dedication. So, on the subject of guru, one thing that we all have to understand is that there are many different types of gurus out there in the world, many teachers. And in India, if you talk with some Indian people about their lives and everything, the word guru may come up in a totally different context. They say, well, my son's violin guru is so-and-so. My daughter's dance guru is so-and-so. So there's all kinds of gurus. Even your school teacher is a kind of a guru. But the deciding factor in what level of guru they are is whether they are established in the supreme state. If they're not established in that, if they suffer from the same disease of ignorance that we suffer from, they're just a, run-of-the-mill guru. They can teach you one thing. They can't teach you how to be happy in life. They can teach you violin. They can teach you economics. They can teach you something like that. So, are they abiding in that supreme state, like Amma is? And are they demonstrating how to reach that through their lives? Is their life itself a teaching? That is probably the most important thing, because people can talk about it, but it's very hard for them to live it. Even very erudite people, you will see that they just can't live it. They suffer from the same vasanas that we all do. So then he goes on, he says how faith in the teaching gives us knowledge, because only if you really believe that it's true can you assimilate that. If you're questioning the teaching all the time, then you can't assimilate it, you lose. Not Amma, not Krishna, not the Gita. So the pursuit of self-knowledge, we should remember, is the ultimate goal of everything, all the spiritual practices that Amma is teaching us. So we just have to understand that everything culminates in that. When Amma's coming here, this is the goal. Ultimately, she's trying to guide us to that, through everything she does. Humanitarian activities are a goal of one kind, but she could say that I'm trying to help those people, the recipients, the beneficiaries, I'm trying to help them reach God realization. And you're helping, because if they don't have food, if they don't have clothing and shelter, how are they going to think about God realization? So by serving them, you're helping them reach that also. So everything culminates in that eventually. So it's like you can say, in order to illumine the room, you need a candle, you need the wax, you need the wick, you need the candle holder, you need the match. All of things are needed. All these things are needed. But the thing that ultimately dispels the darkness is what? The flame. The flame. All of these other things are for the sake of lighting the flame and having it shine. So our life, our body, mind, intellect are like the candle and the wax and the wick. Ultimately, we're trying to gain proximity to Amma's blazing candle so we can light that candle with her wisdom. That's the whole point. And ultimately, everything else is just going to dissolve and merge in that flame and become infinite. So that is the culmination of the mind's purpose, is to merge in the Guru. So when you get that opportunity, we shouldn't hesitate to allow it. Typically, if the Guru is giving you a chance to merge, it's also kind of burning. It's like
you feel your ego is melting, it's painful, and sometimes we kind of recoil, like, I don't want to go there, I'm not ready for that. So you have to remember that in order to really become infinite, we have to dissolve the ego, and a little bit of pain is there. But Amma says that when the flower blossoms, when the bud breaks open, it also experiences pain. And if the bud says, oh, it's too painful, I don't want to blossom, what's going to happen? It's just going to die. It's not going to achieve the purpose of its birth. So there's pain, but she says it's joyful pain because it's the fruition of our birth. So the only way to get that self-knowledge is through direct interaction with a realized being like Amma. And actually, it's just like learning the real meaning of a word from a native speaker. Think how many qualities you've learned from Amma directly, just by observing her. You read it in a book, it doesn't make sense. You observe it in her, it finally makes sense. For example, humility. What is humility? You know, you can talk about humility. I remember there was one, I told you about it once, you might not, a long time ago, I'll tell it again. There was one of the Swamis was saying that one of his school teachers had this aura of humility, and you just couldn't kind of, what would you say, apple polish with him. You know, you couldn't get on his good side by praising him. So he was like kind of acting like a humble person. And one of the students went up and said, you know, sir, I have observed that no matter what people say to you, what they say in praise of you, it never affects you. You are absolutely impervious to praise. And then he said, yeah, you're right.
Got it.
Got him, right?
Got him.
Got him. So it's like, you know, you're not impervious to praise. That ego is so subtle that you're going to get caught at one point or another. But with Amma, humility is pervasive in everything. In fact, you can see it even in small things, because humility means having, treating everything with love. She treats literally even small things with love. Like a small object, she puts it down with so much love. Or you've seen her pick up those sticks that she's about to beat them to the rhythm, right? Even that before she picks them up, she'll touch them and touch herself, touch her forehead, touch her heart. She puts them down and touches her heart. They're just sticks, right? We wouldn't think twice about it. So that is an example of humility, but it's very practical. You see her do something like that. It's a deep teaching. And he also talks about the 4 primary benefits of having this self-knowledge. One is removal of confusion in life. So once you have self-knowledge, he says there's no more confusion ever again in life. It's kind of nice, right? All the confusion that besets us with difficulties will be gone for good. So you have to remember that life gets better not because you become omniscient and omnipotent and you can like make all the problems go away. You know, sometimes, you know, like in the Hollywood movies, maybe that's what they would make you think you become magic, you just make it all go away. So that's not the key to happiness in life. The key to happiness is that you are so strong inside that nothing affects you. This is what you see in Amma. None of these problems affect her in life. We've seen it time and time again. Any challenge that arises, Amma surmounts it with love. In fact, her whole life, that's the one thing that she has, demonstrated. That's the one, you could say, her sort of elixir to all the problems is that universal love, unconditional love. She has triumphed all the hardships. The second benefit he talks about is the destruction of all sin, all papa, he said. From the past and the present. So all your lifetimes before, if you achieve self-realization, that past karma is all gone. It gets burnt up by that knowledge, he says. And so sin, and the third quality is destruction of all karma. So destruction of sin, destruction of karma. 2 different things. Which means you never have to come back again as a result of your past karma. Only if you're choosing to come back to help other people. In the Buddhist context, we would call it what is it?
Bodhisattva.
Bodhisattva. I remember the Japanese, bosatsu. I don't remember the English or the Sanskrit. So, the fourth benefit is we realize the essential oneness of ourself and the Supreme Self. So, small benefit, just a minor thing. So then he concludes the chapter by making it clear to Arjuna that he has to stand up. Now, he says, stand up, do your duty. Because in order to become a karma yogi and to purify himself, first he has to stand up, right? Because he's collapsed on the floor crying. That's where he was last time, Arjuna. So stand up, be strong, do your duty, purify yourself, and know who you really are. That is how he concludes the fourth chapter. So we have enough time to cover the first verse and then take questions. So that is the summary now. Let us actually read at least one verse, and we will continue next week. There's an opening to the whole chapter, to every chapter, but I don't see it in English, it's only in Sanskrit. Atha chaturtho dhyayaha jnana karma sannyasa yogaha Shri Bhagavan uvacha Imam vivasvate Yogam Proktavanaham Avyayam Vivasvan Manave Praha Manur Ikshvakave Bravit. Okay. Anybody coming for the first time today? You can have them read it.
We don't have a mic.
We don't have a mic. Okay, read it out loud then.
She has a mic.
She has a mic. Does it
It's
work?
not, it's not.
Okay. Huh? We just know a book.
I don't
Someone
know a book, but I could.
Yeah, maybe Shane.
Ah.
First verse, just read the English, please.
Where it says 43? Sorry. Okay, first one. The blessed Lord said, I proclaimed this imperishable yoga to the sun god. He declared it to Manu, and Manu told it to Ishvaku.
All right.
Is that all right? Pronunciation of Ishvaku.
Yeah, Ikshvaku. Yeah.
All right.
Good.
Mm.
So, this is how the chapter starts. It's like, what does this have to do with anything, right? That's what we think. But remember, the first section of this chapter is a bit of a digression. Digression in the sense that he's talking about a subject that only gets covered in the first 8 verses of chapter 4. And he doesn't touch on it before or after. Remember, it was the subject of avatars, incarnations of God. So before he gets into the main topic, he's going to do this digression. And in this digression of these 8 verses particularly, he's going to cover the greatness of the Bhagavad Gita teaching. He's also going to talk about avatars. So the first topic, the greatness of this teaching that he's giving, is the opening to the topic of avatars. Because he says, I taught it to the sun god. So just imagine one of your friends says, I just taught you something, but actually, it's not the first time I taught it. I taught it to Abraham Lincoln also. They'll be like, what? You okay? So this is what Arjuna is going to say the same thing. He's like, how could you have taught it to the sun god in the beginning of the creation? Doesn't make any sense. So, we have the Gita, and we know that it's true. So, but he's in the Gita, right? So he doesn't realize that this is some scripture that's going to be remembered for thousands of years. But Krishna's point is that this is not a new teaching. It's ancient. It's eternal. That's why he calls it the imperishable teaching. And it's none other than the same teaching that was taught in the Vedas. Particularly, which part of the Vedas? Remember we talked about 4 parts of the Vedas. Which part of the Vedas is the Bhagavad Gita? Basically summarizing, condensing.
The Upanishads.
Upanishads, right. Vedas. So Upanishads are the part of the Vedas that talks about self-knowledge, realization. So the Gita is a condensed version of the Upanishads. So that's what he's saying. Upanishads is the Vedas. And the Vedas, he taught it to the sun god, means sun god was there before anything was here, right? Even the scientists say that before this universe existed, there was the Big Bang. Well, Big Bang is like a sun, right? It's the beginning of creation. It's that, they say, don't they say that not our galaxy, but the whole universe is whirling around one central sun? Isn't that what the scientists say? That's what I read at least. I don't know if it's true. I read it on Wikipedia. It must be true, right? No, but scientists say something like that. There's a sun. The Big Bang happened initially, right? So even science has a similar concept that first there was the sun, and after that everything else came into existence. So like that, the sun god had that knowledge given by Krishna, of all people. How can that be? He's going to answer that later. And that's how he leads into the concept of incarnations. Because whoever Krishna is, it's not the body. It can't be the body in that name, Krishna. It's got to be some supreme principle, some supreme being that has always existed and always will, and could easily have existed at the time that this universe came into existence, which was only one in many, many countless cycles of creation and dissolution, right? So Krishna, interestingly, typically in the modern day, people want to claim originality and they want to claim this is my teaching, but he just willingly says, oh no, this is from the Vedas, I'm just telling it to you in a modern context. So it's not my teaching. So it's a very humble way of going about it. And Amma does the same thing. She attributes the teaching to the tradition, to the whole lineage. She just says, I'm just presenting it to you in the modern day. If you were to read the Rig Veda, in certain places, the ancient sages, we don't even know how old the Vedas are, right? Amma told me that they're from time immemorial, before there was even any language or writing. So it's like before the Ice Age, who knows when it was. And so let's say it was hundreds of thousands of years ago, whatever it was. At that time, the sages said that we pay our respects to all the sages, the ancient and the new. So if you're like hundreds of thousands of years back, what's ancient to you? I mean, you can't even conceive of it, right? So they pay respects, everybody pays respects, including Krishna. And this tradition was handed down through different ways. So again, you have this in parallel. There's the renunciate sages, like the people who leave the world, and then there's the people who stay in the world and convey the teachings to their disciples. There's both types of lineages in the Vedas. You have renunciate teachers or rishis, and you have householder teachers or rishis. Sometimes the spouse is the disciple. Sometimes the child is the disciple. But if it's a renunciate rishi or seer, they're teaching, like in an ashram to a young monk or something like that. So here Krishna is talking about Surya. Vivaswan means the sun god, right? So Vivaswan, actually that Vivaswa means the one who energizes or who is powerful. And we know that the sun is responsible either directly or indirectly for all life being energized on this planet. So the sun god, or Vivaswan, is said to have been the originator of that clan, of the Surya Vamsha, or the sun clan, which is Krishna's clan. It's also Rama's clan. And so this yogam, this word yogam, is the theory and practice of that teaching. And avyayam, that word imperishable, it comes into play not only because the teaching has never changed over all these millions of years, but it's also teaching us how to achieve what is eternal, which never perishes. So the teaching is imperishable and it bestows the imperishable. And so he taught it to the sun god, and the sun god did what? He taught it to Manu. So Manu, who is the progenitor of the whole human race, it says in this time, right? It's how many billions and trillions of years that this creation goes on according to the yogic science. So there was one person who was the beginning of that whole human race this time, and that's Manu. And Manu had a son who was Ikshwaku. And Manu taught it to his son, and then from there on it went on to all the whole creation, all the way down to the modern day. But after Manu taught it to Ikshwaku, what happened after that? That's what we're going to find out next week. No, it's always like that. Because I can't cover the whole book in one class. So you have a few minutes for questions, if there are any, and then we'll meditate together. Yeah.
As you could, in the beginning, you talked about the distinction between an avatar and a normal human being. And what about the distinction between a normal human being that becomes self-realized, like some of these gurus, and how does that compare to an avatar?
Okay, well, still those three differences apply. The cause of their birth, the nature of their existence, and the purpose of their birth. So the people who take birth and start off in ignorance like we are, but through spiritual practices and through the Guru's grace, they achieve realization while in the body are called Jivan Muktas. So a Jivan Mukta means someone who becomes liberated while living in the body. So the examples that people often see are, like one example is Ramana Maharishi, typical example that's given. Amma's very conservative in naming any people who achieve realization in the body because she knows that realized beings don't grow on trees like that. You know, these days people are all too ready to claim that they have achieved realization. She doesn't really buy it. But so really there's very few people in the modern day that we can say achieved that and that Amma will actually endorse. So Ramana Maharishi is one such being. So let's take him as an example. So he was born still non-realized. So he was born because of his karma. He took birth because he was not realized. He had some karma to finish off, and he came and took a body. And he was bound by his ignorance until he achieved realization, which the story everybody knows typically. So his nature, his existence was also being bound by ignorance. And the purpose of his birth was to realize who he is, to purge his karma and realize his true nature, which he fortunately accomplished in that birth, very rare. So in that sense, he is, the distinction between a Jivan Mukta and an Avatara is exactly the same as us, until they realize who they are, realize God. And the difference between us and them is that, actually there's another similarity. What happens is, even after they achieve realization, they have leftover karma, Amma says, and the scriptures also say. They have to experience that karma, even though they're realized. So they go through whatever suffering they have yet to finish off, in order to be completely finished. That's why you hear stories about realized beings dying of terrible diseases, like Ramakrishna Paramahamsa died of throat cancer or something like that. It's really, kind of hard to understand why should something like that happen. But there was karma remaining. It was like that momentum that was created from past lives. Realization may have come here, but there was still some momentum yet to go. The difference is that after that moment of realization, it doesn't affect them at all. Just like we said, it's like the butter floating in the water, or the lotus leaf floating on the top of the lake. Just, it's there, but it doesn't get affected. It doesn't get wet at all. So, whereas if we get sick, if we suffer, we identify with it so much. So that same disease of throat cancer would have just been torturous for us. But for Ramakrishna Paramahamsa, he could just watch as the body suffered. So that's the difference between us and them. They go through all the suffering, but it doesn't affect them at all. It doesn't disturb their mind. If you read Paramatmananda Swami's book, Nida Swami's book, he talks about how he went to the hospital with his guru before he met Amma, who had some infection, horrible infection in his leg, and the doctors were doing some kind of surgical procedure on the infected leg, and they were going to give him some anesthetic. If I remember correctly, I think he just said, no, I don't need anesthetic. And they started operating on him, and they were just doing a horrible job. They were just poking here and there. They weren't, doing it properly, and it was creating tremendous pain. And, and then, but the doctor's name was like Rama or something like that. So he says, and so this guy was a realized being, according to the Swami, and his guru, Ratnamji, right? So every time the doctor would do something that created intense pain in him, it would make his hair stand on end. And he was like, his eyes were going backwards, he was going into samadhi, and we would be like screaming in pain. But, because, the doctor was wondering, what's wrong with this guy? And then he would come down and he would say, laughing blissfully, he'd say, every time you do that, I remember Rama, because his name is Rama, and he's the one inflicting the pain. He said, Rama, and then he goes into samadhi. Maybe it was Krishna, I don't remember his name actually, something like the name of God. So that's the difference. They have the prarabdha, they have to suffer, but it's the body that's suffering. They could be going into samadhi. Right? That's a big difference between us and them. Any other questions?
So if Ramana Maharishi, he was a Jivan Mukta, and Amma is an avatar, Mahatma.
You can say, a Mahatma, an avatara, you could say is a Mahatma, but a Mahatma is not an avatar. It's like a square is a rectangle is not a square kind of statement. So, but typically Mahatma, in the strict sense, means a self-realized being. But it's kind of hard you can't really say that someone who was born with that divine understanding is a Mahatma in the strictest sense, because they never realized this self. They came down with that knowledge, with that experience. It's a little bit confusing to mix those words. Typically you would say a Mahatma is someone who realized who they are. So if you come down with that, like you wouldn't say Krishna's a Mahatma, You wouldn't say Rama or Buddha is a Mahatma, or Jesus. You could say it that way, but since we're on the subject of talking about avatars and we're trying to understand what they are better, you would have to sort of make a distinction.
Also, is it pointless trying to, understand these highly evolved people, because it takes one to recognize one? Inside, I believe, Amma is this self-realized being. Do I really understand it? No.
No, we don't.
And as much as I read about it, it's all an intellectual exercise.
It's true. It's true. And the thing is, it does take one to know one, as Amma also says. Only one realized being can recognize another realized being. So we just have this faith that Amma is that, and our experience corroborates it. But one thing that we can, and this is the advantage of studying scriptures sometimes, because even Amma tells us to study scriptures. She tells, the brahmacharis, and sometimes she says one of the reasons why we're confused about the purpose of life is because nobody is in touch with those ancient traditional teachings anymore, right? So, but another thing that's beneficial about studying scriptures like this is that it helps us to understand what a realized being should look like. All these things he says throughout the 18 chapters, intermittently he touches on a realized being, a jnani. He says this is what they should do, or this is what they should look like. And so you can just say, anybody who claims to be that, you can just say you've got your checklist, and you're like, no. Does he meet all these criteria? If he doesn't, then maybe he's kind of like me, still ignorant, he hasn't realized. Yeah. So.
And also, is it possible to, inside of you, you kind of know there is something, really, great about this being without really understanding, Yeah.
Well, you feel
it. Inside of you, you kind of know.
The only way that we can ascertain is through some, intuitive experience in her presence. She makes you feel it, and then you just get that moment of clarity. It's not like you go into samadhi necessarily or anything like that, but she just makes it known to you. I shared that with you guys at one point. The first time I went to Puri, I walked in there and I walked into the hall where Amma was giving darshan. And I didn't consider myself like a intuitive, clairvoyant person or anything like that. In fact, I was totally in my head, way too much in my head. But when I walked in there and sat down, I bowed down, I stayed, she was on that side, I was as far away as possible. I was kind of feeling a little uncomfortable. And I was just looking at Amma, and then something just hit me, and it just said, it's only because of this person that you reached here safely. This person protected you from the point A all the way to here. And I don't know how I knew that, it just hit me, and I just knew it. So, she's telling me, probably, you could say. It's not intellectual, but you get those kind of glimpses, and then that makes your faith more firm. That's the only way, because you can't really wrap your head around what is infinite knowledge, Yeah. And on that note, let's stop wrapping our heads and start meditating. So we will first chant a couple of prayers to end, because the official time is 9:30, and those who have time can stay after with us and meditate. Om Asato ma Satgamaya Tamaso ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Loka Samasta Sukhino Bhavantu. Loka Samasta Sukhino Bhavantu. Loka Samasta Sukhino Bhavantu. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Hari Om. So, if you can stay with us for some more time, please join us in meditation. Keep your spine and neck as straight as possible, and close your eyes. Sit in a comfortable posture, but try to remain alert. Take a few long, deep breaths. And with each deep breath, feel your body and mind relaxing further and further. Try to feel a powerful spiritual presence here in this room. Try to feel Amma here with us in subtle form. Feel all around you. Feel her shining within you. And focus your awareness on the rhythm of your breathing. Be fully conscious of each and every inhalation and exhalation. Breathe with a deep feeling and feel the subtle life energy flowing in and out of the body with each breath. After observing the breathing process and the life energy like this for some time, the awareness becomes even more subtle, and you can dive deeper and deeper within. Witness the thoughts, any thoughts that arise, just watch them pass inside of you, like clouds passing through the sky. Remain completely detached. Any thought that arises, any emotion, fear, desires, restlessness, each time respond with, I am not that, not that, not that, not this. And continue to witness peacefully. the more we de-identify with the body, the energy, and the thoughts, the more the self-luminous Atman shines from within us and illumines our inner being. Allow that pure consciousness to shine brightly and know that you are that. Let us now offer our prayers at the feet of the beloved Amma, invoking the love and devotion of a small child for its mother. O my most beloved Amma, please continue to bless and help this child of yours. Your life, your love is my guiding light. It's because of you, Amma, that I'm walking this path. Now I'm safe in your loving arms, protected. Please keep me there, Amma. Don't let me fall due to my ego. Help me remember that you're always with me, Amma. Don't let me forget that you and I are one. It's when I forget Amma that all the problems happen. Please, make me, whatever it takes, make me remember you all day long. That way, I will identify with the self and walk the path of truth and righteousness. And I'll conclude with one final prayer. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate Om Shanti Shanti
Shanti. Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Hari Om. One more long deep breath. And as you exhale, slowly open your eyes. Shall